Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Whiskey and History podcast. I am your host, Zach Homeyer, and tonight we're going to talk about Martin Luther King's birthday. And the reason for this is, I know I never knew this, but Martin Luther King did come to visit little old Springfield, Illinois, to give a speech. Of course, it wasn't one of his iconic speeches like I Have a Dream, but it's still pretty amazing that he did visit Springfield in the early 1960s. But before we dive into the story, real quick, got your cocktail handy to honor Dr. Martin Luther King. Again, I'm drinking one of my favorite drinks is Crown Royal. This flavor is Reserve. Reserve is aged over a long period of time. It's really, really smooth. Just put a little water in with it, and it just tastes like drinking ice water, literally. So, before we dive in, take a little sip. So let's start off with the story. Like I was saying earlier, this podcast is to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He is, you could argue, the most famous African American in American history. He was the main leader of the civil rights movement. He just was persistent in trying to get equal rights, not just for African Americans, but for everyone. Women, workers, just willing to push the boundaries during a difficult time in American history, which was the civil rights movement. Obviously, it wasn't right. Hopefully the country's past a lot of these issues. Today we still see these issues arise. I'm not here to discuss politics, but I'm here to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Recently, too, they just released a new statue in honor of him in Boston. I've read a lot of controversial things on the new statue that was built in his honor. Again, let's not get into that, but if you are interested in what I'm talking about, I'll put a link in the description below. The city of Boston just revealed it, I believe, this last weekend. But anyway, let's get on with the story. Martin Luther King Jr. was invited to come visit Springfield in the early 60s. He did give a speech in December of 61. I'm getting this information from the Illinois Times. Anyway, he gave a speech in 61 in Bale Harbor, Florida, where he did deliver a prelude to his I Have a Dream speech, which is kind of interesting, to the National AFL-CIO convention. And there is where King met the Illinois AFL-CIO president, Reuben Saunderstorm. According to Peoria labor writer and Saunderstorm's biographer, Chris Stevens, the two corresponded, and Saunderstorm invited King to Illinois for the 1963 convention. But instead, King couldn't make it, and President Lyndon Johnson actually spoke at the 1964 convention here in Illinois. But anyway, King finally decided to come on October 7th, 1965. And the convention was held at the famous Illinois State Armory, which is located right across the street from the Illinois State Capitol, the current state capitol. It's an old, big concrete building. It was built in the mid-1920s. Actually, I think it was during the Great Depression. The original arsenal burnt down, and that's another story for a later day. But anyway, the armory was constructed. It's actually a really famous building. It's currently vacant. I don't know what they're going to do with it. I made a proposal, actually, for my college class. One time I wrote a paper on the benefits of the armory and why we should keep it. Sorry to get off track a little bit here, but it leads back to the story. But anyway, when I was doing research on the armory, the reason why I thought it was important to preserve the armory was because it was where all the concerts were held, like rock concerts. That's where that's where my grandpa, John Homeyer, set the city tournament record for the most points scored in the 1950s at the Armory, where the city tournament basketball was held. So when I was doing research for my paper, I'm like, yeah, I want to preserve this building because my grandpa created history here. His record eventually was broke in the 80s. But anyway, I started doing research on the Armory to see like what concerts, what rock bands like Van Halen played there. Apparently, they almost burned down the Armory, which is kind of ironic because the original Arsenal was burnt down as well. How crazy Van Halen would have been if they burned down the State Armory. But anyway, when I was doing this, they're talking about all the famous people that visited the Armory. For example, John F. Kennedy also visited the Armory to give a speech. Then they said Martin Luther King Jr., Lyndon Johnson. We have, I can't think of them. Oh, Richard Nixon was another one. So just these iconic figures in U.S. history, especially during this time period. I think Dwight Eisenhower was another one. But anyway, I came back to this and I'm like, you know what? Let's talk about when Martin Luther King visited Springfield. So that's my little background story to this. But anyway, he came on October 7th, 1965, speaking to around 4,000 plus delegates at the Illinois AFL-CIO annual convention at the State Armory. King, like I said earlier, he favorited the civil rights movement and he compared it to the labor rights movement in Illinois, in saying that the two are basically similar. They're both trying to better their life. Martin Luther King started his speech in a very, very interesting way, which I absolutely love this. But King started his speech with a tip of the hat to President Abraham Lincoln. And he also thanked the city of Springfield, especially the mayor Nelson Howarth, for the keys to the city, as dozens of state employees, which I think they said, or like I said, maybe earlier, around over 4,000 people attended this speech, used their lunch hour to catch a glimpse of the civil rights leader. And the main focus of the speech, of this speech at the convention, was comparing the civil rights movement to the labor law movement that was happening in the city, or not really the city, but the state of Illinois at the time, which I don't really know a whole lot about. But King noted that the civil rights and labor movements both grew out of a burning needs of oppressed poor for security and equality, and each was denied justice by the dominant forces of society and had to win a place in the sun by its own intense struggle and indescribable self-sacrifice. King rejected advice that blacks should wait, stating that Negroes had learned from labor that to wait is to submit and surrender. And the civil rights leader told the labor delegates that they had been on the defensive, beating back efforts to take away labor gains, while at the same time facing the pressure of automation's threat to jobs. Labor's other menace was the South, and the widespread of Negro poverty there weakened wages for whites and Negroes, King said. Lower wages in the South, in turn, created downward pressure on the higher wages in the North, King warned. King addressed an issue labor continues to fight today, and he was warmly applauded when he called for a repeal of Section 14-B of the Taft-Hartley Law, permitting states to establish right-to-work laws. In today's prosperity, millions of Negroes live in conditions identical or worse than the Depression 30s. King said, citing some ghetto unemployment rates higher than in the 1930s, and progress of the nation has not carried the Negro with it, King concluded. So right there you can see that he was very, very passionate to have, labor be equal, not just for African Americans, but for poor whites as well. And he was stating that it actually would hurt the businessmen in the North as well, which is kind of an interesting twist on his thought. Uh, but anyway, King called for a coalition of conscience, of labor in the church, the academic community, and the civil rights movement, warning that if such coalition does not emerge to demand a solution to these economic and social problems, I am afraid that hostility and violence will breed a crisis of nationwide proportion. And King called for a guaranteed annual wage, adequate minimum wage for all who work without expectations or without exceptions, and guaranteed employment for all willing to work, which he said was a basic human and moral right. And King concluded optimistically that by working together and through a mighty coalition of conscience, we will be able to solve the problems ahead, and we shall overcome, because the arc of moral universe is long, but is bent towards justice. And so, and even the mayor of Springfield even said of King's speech, he is fighting for the cause that ultimately, of course, will win. And so you can even look today that King did ultimately win with the speech, that we do have an equal, hopefully, or not, we do have minimum wage for everyone across the United States. I know the state of Illinois actually raised the minimum wage to up to $15 an hour over the next several years. That would please probably Dr. King in this day and age. Maybe it's not enough, you could argue, but it's just kind of interesting that King was fighting for a minimum wage for all workers without any exceptions, and employment for anyone that was willing to work to help raise or lower the poverty level and raise the amount of workers in the workforce, and to basically help anyone that's willing to work get a job. And maybe, this speech from over 50 plus years ago can ring home to you, especially, after really dissecting this and reading you guys just snippets of it. Really does make me think that, maybe the country today needs to start focusing on some of these things that King says in this little speech alone in Springfield, Illinois, that we must work together to overcome these crises of a nationwide situation and try to help get anyone or allow everyone to get a job. And I feel like today's world, people are struggling, or people don't really want to work. And I feel like we're all in this together, and we all need to contribute some way or another. But anyway, following the speech, King did donate $1,500 to help advance the cause of civil rights and pass a civil rights resolution calling affiliates to wipe out discrimination and work to achieve equal training and employment opportunities and establish the civil rights education programs. King did return one more time later, speaking at Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington in February of 1966. But it's just crazy that his legacy is not really known in Springfield, in my opinion. As a kid, you are taught so much about Martin Luther King. The most famous speech, probably of anyone, like even more than any U.S. president that you ever talked or learned about, is Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. I remember as a kid, you had to remember it, or you're forced to memorize it, is what I'm trying to say. And which is just really a good thing to do for children. But anyway, it's just wild that we talk about and all this learning. We never hear about how he visited Illinois, especially Springfield, where I was born and raised. And just 5 minutes from my house, he gave this speech. Like I said, it's not one of his most recognizable, but it's very significant that this great leader in American history did visit Springfield. And it's sad because the building, like I said earlier, the armory, it's abandoned. It's just deteriorating very slowly over time. And one day, Springfield is notorious for this, is tearing down old historical buildings. And there's a good chance that it's going to be torn down one day. And it's going to be really, really sad when we lose another historical building with so much history inside. The walls are just begging for it to be released. The walls could talk, and it would just be truly amazing if someone or the city would put some money together to preserve this building, maybe open up a museum to honor Dr. Martin Luther King and these other leaders or other famous people that have came and visited Springfield to talk. But anyway, just a short little episode to honor Dr. Martin Luther King. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you have any questions or concerns on anything, please reach out to me. That doesn't sound good. I don't like that. I appreciate everyone listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this short little episode on Dr. Martin Luther King. All the links for all the social media pages are down below. If you have any future episode ideas, feel free to email me. Email me at any time. The email's down below. Thanks, you guys, for I cannot talk. Thanks, guys, for listening. I hope you learned something new and exciting about Dr. Martin Luther King. Don't forget to follow all my social media pages down below. The links are in the description. Hope you guys enjoyed this short little episode to honor one of America's greatest icons on his birthday.